In the shadowed aftermath of a world torn apart, a single, unexpected encounter on the war-ravaged streets of Heidelberg ignites a forbidden connection between Emilie, a resilient German nurse, and John, an introspective American soldier. As they navigate the delicate ruins of post-war life, their story unfolds, revealing the power of human connection, the pain of separation, and the indomitable spirit of hope. Join Emily as she embarks on a journey of healing, discovery, and the pursuit of a future where love and understanding dare to flourish amidst the rubble of a town and a world rebuilding itself. The war had ended, but the streets of Heidelberg still echoed with the memory of conflict. Buildings bore the scars of bombings, and people moved with the weary step of those who had seen too much. Yet, amidst the rubble, life was stubbornly taking root again, with markets slowly reopening and children's laughter occasionally piercing the somber air. Emilie Bauer walked these streets with a sense of surrealism. Each step took her past ruins that were once her neighbors' homes, past the bakery that used to fill the air with the sweet aroma of bread early in the morning. Now, American soldiers roamed the streets, their foreign accents and laughter a stark contrast to the town's otherwise solemn atmosphere. Emilie was a slender figure, her once bright eyes dimmed by years of hardship. The war had taken much from her brother, her dreams, and a part of her soul. She worked at the local hospital, a job that threw her into the war's aftermath daily, tending to wounds that were more than skin deep. As she made her way home from a long shift, her path intersected with a group of American soldiers. They were young, their faces unmarred by the war's touch, a vivid reminder of how different their experiences had been from hers. They smiled at her, one of them tipping his hat in a gesture that felt oddly out of place in the war-torn setting. "Good afternoon," one soldier said, his German tinged with a heavy American accent. Emilie nodded, murmuring a response. She had learned enough English to communicate basic ideas, a skill that had become more of a necessity than a choice these days. The soldier seemed to take her nod as an invitation for conversation. "Beautiful town you've got here, despite everything," he continued, gesturing broadly at the surroundings. Emily's eyes swept over the familiar destruction, a sight she had grown painfully accustomed to. "It was once more beautiful," she replied, her voice carrying a mix of pride and sorrow. The soldier nodded, his expression turning thoughtful. "I can only imagine. We're here to help rebuild, make things right again." The words were kind, but Emilie felt a pang of skepticism. She had heard many promises before, seen many new faces come and go, all claiming to be harbingers of change. Yet, here she stood, in a world still shattered. She offered a polite smile, excusing herself as she continued her walk home. The soldier's presence was a constant reminder of the changed world, a world where German girls walked alongside American soldiers, their futures uncertain and intertwined. As Emilie reached her home, a modest two-story building that had miraculously survived the bombings, she paused. The house felt too quiet, too empty. Once, it had been filled with the laughter of her family, the heart of her existence. Now it was just her, and the memories that lingered like ghosts in the corners. Upstairs, she gazed out of her window, her view a collage of destruction and rebuilding. Children played in the streets, darting between tanks and jeeps, their innocence a stark contrast to the soldiers' vigilant watch. She wondered about the world they would grow up in, a world being shaped by the very soldiers who now patrolled their streets. Emilie's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her neighbor, Mrs. Weber, calling out to her from below. Sighing, she tucked away her reflections, preparing to face another evening of rationed dinner and shared stories of loss and survival. The first chapter of their new lives was being written, each day a tentative step towards an unknown future. And as the sun set over Heidelberg, casting long shadows across the streets, Emilie realized that despite everything, hope was stubbornly taking root amidst the ruins. It was faint, but it was there, a testament to the enduring spirit of her town, her people, and perhaps even herself. The following day dawned clear and bright, a rare luxury in the often gloomy German climate. Emilie decided to take a longer route to the hospital, meandering through the streets that seemed a little more alive each day. People were out, attempting to restore normalcy to their lives, sweeping the steps, opening windows, and children were playing near piles of rubble, their laughter a defiant sound against the backdrop of destruction. As she walked, Emilie couldn't help but notice the American soldiers again, their presence now a constant in the daily life of the town. They were everywhere, patrolling, organizing relief efforts, or simply taking in the sights of a foreign land. Their uniforms stood out starkly against the worn, earthy tones of the city. Today, one soldier in particular caught her attention. He was standing apart from the others, sketching the facade of the Heidelberg castle ruins onto a small notepad. His brow was furrowed in concentration, a look of genuine appreciation on his face. As Emilie passed by, her curiosity got the better of her, and she found herself pausing to watch him. The soldier noticed her gaze and, with a friendly smile, held up his notepad for her to see. "I'm trying to capture a bit of the history here," he said, his German clearer than most. "It's not much, but I want to remember this place." Emilie was taken aback by the gesture, unused to such open friendliness from a stranger, let alone an occupying soldier. She stepped closer, looking at the sketch. It was surprisingly detailed, showing the grandeur and the scars of the castle with an artist's touch. "It's very good," she admitted, finding herself speaking in English, wanting him to understand her true sentiment. The soldier grinned, pleased. "Thank you, I'm John." He extended his hand, a little awkwardly, knowing the gesture might not be familiar. "Emilie," she replied, taking his hand briefly. They exchanged a smile, a moment of human connection amidst the vast chasm that the war had created between their worlds. John asked her about the castle, and Emilie found herself describing its history, the proud legacy of Heidelberg, and the countless stories embedded in its ancient stones. As they talked, Emilie felt a strange sense of ease. John was a good listener, nodding and asking questions that showed a genuine interest. It was a small pocket of normalcy, a conversation between two people fascinated by history, not a German woman and an American soldier. But as they chatted, Emilie couldn't completely forget the context of their meeting. She was acutely aware of the looks from passers-by, the curious glances of her neighbors, and the wary eyes of John's fellow soldiers. This was not a simple interaction. It was layered with the complex emotions of a post-war world. Eventually, John had to leave, his unit moving on to their next task. He tore out the sketch from his notepad and handed it to Emilie. "A piece of Heidelberg for you," he said with a smile. Emilie took the paper, feeling an unexpected surge of emotion. "Thank you, John," she managed to say, her voice steady but warm. They parted ways, Emilie continuing to the hospital, the sketch carefully folded in her pocket. Throughout her day, her mind kept wandering back to the conversation, to the normalcy and understanding it had brought, if only for a moment. The encounter left Emilie with a mix of emotions. There was a cautious hope, a wonder at the unexpected connection she had made. But there was also apprehension, a knowledge that such interactions were fraught with complications in a world still divided by the remnants of war. As she lay in bed that night, Emilie looked at the sketch again, tracing the lines of the castle with her finger. It was more than a drawing. It was a reminder that amidst the ruins, there were still possibilities for understanding and moments of shared humanity. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel a cautious sense of optimism about the future. In the days following her encounter with John, Emilie noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the town. Word had spread of her conversation with the American soldier, and it seemed everyone had an opinion about it. Some of her neighbors looked at her with a newfound respect or curiosity, intrigued by her interaction with the occupiers. Others, however, whispered behind closed doors, their glances sharp and judgmental. One afternoon, while Emilie was helping at the market, the topic surfaced again. Her friend Clara, who had been relatively quiet about the whole situation, finally voiced her thoughts. "Don't you think it's dangerous, getting so friendly with one of them?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "People are talking, Emilie." Emilie paused, considering her words carefully. "He was just a person, Clara. A person interested in our history, our town. Should I have turned away from a simple conversation?" "But he's an American soldier," Clara insisted, her voice low. "You know how people feel about them. Some say they're here to help. Others see them as just another conqueror." The conversation was cut short as customers approached, but the words lingered in Emilie's mind. She knew Clara was right. The town was divided in its view of the Americans. For every person grateful for the end of the war and the aid the soldiers brought, there was another who saw only the continuation of occupation and control. That evening, Emilie decided to take a walk, needing to clear her head. The streets were quieter at dusk, the shadows long and the air cool. She found herself walking towards the outskirts of the town, where the American base was located. She didn't plan to go inside, but something drew her there, a need to see the place that had brought John and so many others into her world. As she approached, she could hear the sounds of the American soldiers, their laughter and music drifting out. It was a slice of another world, so foreign yet so close. She stood there for a long while, watching as soldiers moved back and forth, the setting sun casting a golden light over the scene. "Lost, Fräulein?" A voice broke her reverie. Emilie turned to see an American MP standing at the entrance, watching her curiously. "No, just looking," Emilie replied, feeling suddenly foolish. The MP nodded, not unkindly. "Well, be careful. It's getting dark." Emilie nodded and quickly turned away, her cheeks warm with embarrassment. As she walked back home, she thought about the MP's words. Be careful. It was a warning, a reminder of the realities of her situation. The American soldiers might bring change and hope, but they also brought uncertainty and a host of new challenges. When she arrived home, Emilie found her father waiting for her, a look of concern on his face. "I heard about your talk with the American," he said gently. "You must be careful, Emilie. These are complicated times." Emilie sighed, feeling the weight of her father's words. "I know, Papa. I was just talking to him, nothing more. But it made me realize maybe we can learn from them. Maybe there's a way forward together." Her father smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Perhaps, my child. But remember, not everyone sees it that way. Be mindful of the town, of our neighbors. We must all find our way through this together." That night, Emilie lay in bed, her thoughts a whirl of hope and caution. She realized that her actions, however small, had ripples, affecting not just her but the people around her. The town was a microcosm of the larger world, a place where the wounds of war were still fresh, and the path to healing was fraught with division and uncertainty. But amid all the doubts, Emilie held on to the feeling of that conversation with John, the sense of connection and understanding. It was a small light in the darkness, a reminder that even in a divided town there were possibilities for unity and compassion. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she wanted to be a part of shaping it, for her town, her people, and herself. The days grew shorter as autumn approached, painting the town in shades of amber and gold. Emilie continued her work at the hospital, where the influx of patients had slowed, but the depth of their wounds had not. It wasn't just the physical scars that needed tending. It was the psychological ones that lingered, silent and deep. One evening, as she was finishing her shift, Emilie saw John again. He was accompanying a fellow soldier who had been injured, his arm bandaged and his face etched with pain. John caught her eye and nodded, a silent greeting amid the bustle of the ward. After ensuring his friend was cared for, John walked over to Emilie. "How have you been?" he asked, his voice low. "Busy," Emilie replied, glancing at the beds filled with patients. "And you?" "Same," John said, looking around the ward with a somber expression. "It's hard, seeing so much pain." They spoke briefly, their conversation a whispered exchange in the corner of the busy ward. As they talked, Emilie noticed a certain fatigue in John's eyes, a weariness that went beyond physical tiredness. It was the look of someone who had seen too much, who carried the weight of experiences too heavy to put into words. The conversation turned to their lives during the war, the things they had seen and lost. Emilie spoke of her brother who had died on the Eastern Front, a young man full of dreams and laughter, now just a memory that haunted her. John listened intently, his face a mask of empathy. "I lost friends too," he shared, his voice barely above a whisper. "Good men, caught up in something bigger than any of us. I keep wondering if we could have done things differently." The vulnerability in his words struck Emilie. Here was a soldier, an occupier, yet his grief and guilt mirrored her own. They were both victims of the war in their own ways, both trying to find a path forward amid the ruins. As their shift ended, they found themselves walking together in the cool evening air. The town was quiet, the streets empty as people retreated to the warmth of their homes. Emilie and John walked side by side, their footsteps a soft echo in the silent town. The conversation drifted to the future, to the hopes and fears that lay ahead. Emilie spoke of her desire to see the town rebuilt, to find some semblance of the peace they had lost. John talked of going home, of the life he had left behind and the uncertainty of returning to it. "We're not so different, you and I," John said, looking at Emilie. "We're both just trying to make sense of a world that's changed too much." Emilie nodded, feeling a strange sense of comfort in his words. They had both been shaped by the war, their lives altered in ways they were still trying to understand. But in this moment, walking together under the vast expanse of the night sky, they were just two people, sharing their stories and their scars. As they reached the end of the street, they paused, neither quite ready to say goodbye. The night was still, the air crisp with the promise of winter. "Take care, Emilie," John said finally, his voice soft. "You too, John," Emilie replied, her heart aching with a mix of sorrow and hope. They parted ways, each returning to their own solitary worlds. But the conversation stayed with Emilie, a gentle reminder that, even in the darkest of times, there were connections to be made, wounds to be healed, and perhaps a path to be found towards a future where the scars of war might slowly begin to fade. Autumn deepened, painting the town of Heidelberg in vibrant shades of orange and red. Emilie found herself increasingly distracted, her thoughts often drifting to John and their conversations. She was acutely aware of the growing bond between them, a connection that seemed to strengthen with each brief encounter, each shared glance. But as their friendship deepened, so too did the whispers and disapproving stares. It was one thing to exchange pleasantries with the occupying soldiers, quite another to be seen frequently conversing, laughing, and walking together. Emilie felt the weight of the town's eyes on her, a mix of curiosity, judgment, and even envy. One crisp morning, as she made her way to the hospital, Emilie was stopped by Frau Becker, an elderly neighbor known for her sharp tongue and keen observation. "Emilie Bauer," she began, her voice stern, "you should be mindful of the company you keep. People are talking." Emilie met her gaze, feeling a flush of defiance. "John is just a friend, Frau Becker. He's not like the others." "Maybe so," Frau Becker replied, her eyes not unkind. "But not everyone sees it that way. Be careful, child. These are uncertain times and people are quick to judge." The conversation left Emilie unsettled. She knew the dangers of what people might think or say, the potential repercussions for her family and herself. Yet, the thought of distancing herself from John, of denying the connection that had brought a glimmer of light into her darkened world, filled her with a sense of loss she couldn't quite name. Their meetings became more discreet, stolen moments in the early dawn or late evening when the streets were empty and the world seemed to hold its breath. They spoke of dreams and fears, of the past and the future, their words a quiet rebellion against the world that sought to keep them apart. But with the deepening connection came an ache of realization. Their relationship, whatever it might be, was fraught with complications. John was an American soldier, soon to leave with the rest of his unit. Emilie was a German woman, her life rooted in the ruins of her town. Their paths were destined to diverge, their futures lying in separate worlds. One evening, as they sat on the bank of the Neckar River, watching the water flow past in the moonlight, the conversation turned to what lay ahead. "I'll be leaving soon," John said, his voice heavy with unspoken emotion. "My unit's being rotated back home." Emilie felt a sharp pang of sorrow, a premonition of the loneliness that would return to fill her days. "I know," she replied softly, "and I should be happy for you. But it's hard, thinking of you so far away." John took her hand, his touch gentle. "I don't want to leave you," he confessed. "These moments with you, they've meant more to me than I can say." They sat in silence, the world around them fading to a distant murmur. In that moment, they belonged only to each other, two souls caught in the tide of history, finding solace in the eye of the storm. But as the night wore on, reality crept back in. They knew the dawn would bring back the barriers, the judgments, and the insurmountable distance of their circumstances. With a heavy heart, Emilie stood, pulling her hand gently away from his. "We should be careful," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "It's not just us we have to think about." John nodded, understanding the unspoken words. They made their way back to the town, the distance between them a tangible reminder of the world waiting to reclaim them. As Emilie lay in bed that night, she thought of John, of the bond they had formed amidst the chaos of a world rebuilding itself. It was a connection that defied the rules, a flicker of warmth in the cold shadow of the past. But as dawn broke over Heidelberg, bringing with it the light of reality, Emilie knew that the days of forbidden affections were numbered, and soon she would have to let go of the fleeting dream they had shared. The leaves had fallen, and winter was creeping into the town with its cold embrace, turning the streets into a monochrome landscape. Emilie wrapped her coat tighter around her as she walked, the chill in the air a stark reminder of the changing seasons. The town was adjusting to the American presence, the initial hostility giving way to a cautious acceptance as joint efforts in rebuilding made progress. Despite the complexities of their relationship, Emilie and John continued to meet, their connection a constant in the flux of post-war life. They, along with others, found themselves at the center of a cultural exchange, a tentative exploration of differences and similarities that bridged the gap between occupier and occupied. One evening, John invited Emilie to a small gathering at the base, a casual event intended to foster goodwill. Emilie hesitated, aware of the potential gossip such an appearance might generate, but the desire to see John, to experience a piece of his world, outweighed her reservations. The gathering was a mix of American soldiers and local townspeople, an awkward yet earnest assembly. Music played from a phonograph, jazz and swing, the sounds unfamiliar yet enticing to Emilie's ears. She watched as some of the Americans danced, their movements confident and carefree. John introduced Emilie to his friends, fellow soldiers who welcomed her with friendly curiosity. They shared stories, laughter, and food, the evening a patchwork of cultural sharing. Emilie brought a traditional German cake, which was met with appreciation and delight. As the night progressed, Emilie found herself learning to dance, John's hands guiding her through the steps. The music enveloped them, a world away from the war and its aftermath. For a moment, Emilie allowed herself to be swept away, the rhythm of the music a heartbeat in the silence of the winter night. The gathering ended with a sense of camaraderie, a feeling of shared humanity that transcended national boundaries. Emilie walked home under the starlit sky, the echoes of laughter and music warming her against the cold. In the following weeks, the cultural exchange continued, both formally and informally. American movies were shown in the town hall, their moving images a window into another world. German literature and music were shared with the soldiers, an offering of the rich cultural heritage that had survived the ravages of war. Emilie and John, along with other mixed couples, found themselves at the heart of this exchange. They visited each other's homes, shared meals and stories, their lives intertwining in small yet significant ways. They were building bridges, not just between themselves but between their peoples, a testament to the power of human connection. But as winter deepened, so did the realization that this time was fleeting. The American soldiers would eventually leave, their mission completed, and the town would continue its slow march towards recovery. The future was uncertain, a horizon lined with hope and shadow. Emilie cherished these moments of cultural exchange, the laughter and understanding they brought, but she also knew that they were moments in time, bright sparks in the long journey of healing. As she looked towards the coming year, she wondered what it would bring for her town, for John, and for the delicate bonds that had formed in the aftermath of a world torn apart. Winter was relenting, giving way to the first signs of spring. The air carried a new sense of hope, with the town slowly coming back to life. The American presence, once a constant in the daily rhythms of Heidelberg, was beginning to recede as soldiers prepared to return home. The time for goodbyes was approaching, and with it, a profound sense of uncertainty. Emilie felt the change most acutely. Her meetings with John had become the moments she treasured most, a private sanctuary from the world's expectations and judgments. But as the days passed, each moment felt more precious, tinged with the sadness of an impending farewell. One day, John came to her with a somber expression. "My unit's leaving soon," he confirmed, his voice steady but his eyes revealing the turmoil within. "I'll be going back to the States." Emilie's heart sank, the words she had been dreading now spoken aloud. "I knew this day would come," she replied, her voice a whisper against the spring breeze. "But knowing doesn't make it easier." They walked through the town, their steps slow, savoring the time they had left. John spoke of his home, of the family waiting for him, and the life he was returning to. Emilie listened, her mind painting images of a distant land she had never seen, but had come to know through his eyes. As they talked, the conversation turned to their dreams, to the future they both faced. Emilie spoke of her hopes for the town, for the healing that was still to come. She talked of her desire to continue helping others, to be part of rebuilding what the war had torn down. "And what about us?" John asked, stopping to face her. What happens to us, Emilie? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. They both knew the reality of their situation, the vast distance that would soon separate them and the different paths they were destined to walk. Emilie took a deep breath, her decision clear in her heart. "We will always have Heidelberg," she said softly. "The memories, the moments we shared. But we also have our own lives to live, our own futures to build." John nodded, the pain of understanding in his eyes. They embraced, a long, silent affirmation of everything they had shared and everything they had to let go. The days that followed were a gradual goodbye, a series of last times that culminated in John's departure. Emilie watched as the soldiers left, a convoy of jeeps and trucks disappearing into the horizon. She felt a hollow ache in her chest, a mix of loss and gratitude. Life in Heidelberg continued, the town adapting to the absence of the American soldiers. Emilie returned to her routine, her work at the hospital and her community, but the experience had changed her. She carried the memories of her time with John, the cultural exchange, and the shared humanity that had bridged two worlds. As spring turned to summer, Emilie looked forward with a cautious optimism. The future was uncertain, filled with challenges and possibilities, but she was determined to be part of shaping it, to contribute to the town's healing and growth. The glimpse of the future she had seen with John, a vision of understanding and connection, remained with her. It was a reminder that even in the aftermath of conflict, there was potential for change, for new beginnings. And as she walked the streets of Heidelberg, now bustling with life, Emilie knew that she was ready to face whatever lay ahead, carrying the lessons of the past into the promise of tomorrow. The day John left Heidelberg dawned clear and bright, the kind of day that seemed to mock the sorrow of farewells. Emilie stood at the edge of town alongside others who had come to say their goodbyes, watching as the American soldiers prepared for their departure. The air was thick with a mix of emotions, relief, anticipation, and an undercurrent of sadness. John spotted Emilie in the crowd and made his way over to her. They stood together, their words few, as if speaking too much might make the farewell more real. Around them, final checks were being made, bags loaded, and last-minute instructions given. The end of an era was approaching, the closing of a chapter that had changed them both. "I don't know how to do this," John admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do you say goodbye to someone who's become a part of your life?" Emilie looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You don't," she replied softly. "You just promise to remember." They embraced, a long, tight clasp that was a testament to the depth of their connection. It was a goodbye, but also a thank you, a recognition of the moments they had shared and the impact they had on each other's lives. Finally, the moment they had been dreading arrived. The engines roared to life, the signal for departure. John gave Emilie's hand a final squeeze before turning to join his unit. Emilie watched as he climbed into a jeep, his figure becoming just one of many. As the convoy of American soldiers left, dust billowing behind them, the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving Emilie alone with her thoughts. She stood there for a long time, watching the road long after they had disappeared, the silence around her a stark contrast to the noise and activity of just moments before. Returning home, Emilie felt the emptiness of the house more acutely than ever. It was as if John's departure had taken with it a piece of the life she had known. The town, too, seemed quieter, the absence of the soldiers leaving a void that was both a relief and a sorrow. In the days that followed, Emilie found herself drifting through her routines, the hospital, the market, the occasional gatherings with friends. But everything felt different, tinged with the melancholy of loss and the uncertainty of the future. Yet, as the weeks turned into months, the sharpness of the goodbye began to fade, softened by the passage of time and the human capacity for healing. Emilie found herself smiling more, her interactions with others less overshadowed by her private grief. She continued her work at the hospital, her dedication a constant in the ever-changing world. The town, too, was healing, the signs of war slowly being erased by the efforts of those who called it home. Life was moving forward, and Emilie with it. The goodbye had been a defining moment, a turning point that had forced her to look ahead. And as she did, she realized that she was stronger than she had thought. Her experiences with John and the American soldiers a part of her, but not her entirety. Emilie knew she would never forget John, the time they had spent together, or the lessons she had learned. But she also knew that she was ready to face whatever came next, to embrace the future with an open heart and a hopeful spirit. The streets of Heidelberg, once full of German girls walking with American soldiers, were now pathways to new beginnings, and Emilie was ready to see where they would lead her. Spring returned to Heidelberg, its arrival heralding a time of renewal and growth. The town, once marked by the scars of war, now buzzed with the energy of reconstruction. Buildings were being restored, streets cleaned, and life was blossoming in the ruins. The American soldiers were a memory, their presence in the town a chapter in history, closed yet not forgotten. Emilie found herself at the riverbank, a place she often visited to reflect and find solace. The water flowed gently, carrying with it the whispers of the past and the promise of the future. She thought about the last year, the pain, the loss, and the unexpected friendships that had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. She remembered John, their brief but intense connection. He had returned to his life in America just as she had continued hers in Heidelberg. They had exchanged letters initially, each a precious lifeline filled with words of hope and remembrance. But as time passed, the letters became less frequent, their lives diverging onto separate paths as they had always known they would. Yet, Emilie didn't feel the bitterness of loss as she once had. Instead, she felt a sense of gratitude for the moments they had shared, for the understanding and comfort they had found in each other. John had been a part of her journey, a reminder that, even in the darkest times, human connection could bring light. Looking around, Emilie saw her town with new eyes. The market was bustling, children played in the streets, and there was laughter in the air. The community had come together, united by a common goal of rebuilding what had been lost. She saw resilience, a collective strength that had overcome the shadows of war. At the hospital, Emilie continued her work, her experience with the American soldiers having deepened her empathy and resolve. She was no longer just a nurse. She was a healer, a confidant, and a pillar of the community that had stood by her through thick and thin. As she walked back through the streets of Heidelberg, Emilie realized how much she had grown. The naivety of her youth had given way to a mature understanding of the world and her place in it. She had faced the aftermath of war, found friendship in unlikely places, and learned the power of letting go. Now, she was ready for whatever lay ahead. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to shape. She had dreams to chase, a community to serve, and a life to live fully. The streets of Heidelberg, once a symbol of war's destruction, were now pathways to her future, each step a testament to her journey. And so, as the chapter of the American soldiers closed, a new one began for Emilie, filled with the hope and promise of new beginnings. The world was wide, and her story was far from over. It was just beginning.